That's the thing, yeah. Yeah, I'm good. Okay. That's a technical term, isn't it? Hello, I'm Billy Duffy. I play guitar in a band called The Cult, and I'm here today in marvellous Corona, California, with the lovely people from Gretch to introduce to you my latest limited edition signature model guitar, the 8424 as we call it in Britain, which is, you know, based upon my original Gretch that I had back in 1984. We've just brought it out and up to date to celebrate 40 years of it and my band. Funnily enough, the first thing that I recall was a music teacher at school had some kind of like upright bass that was some hybrid between it was one of those basses in the 60s that had a little thing that stuck out the bottom, and it was like this weird psychedelic green colour. And one time getting a hold of it and trying to play like a rockabilly walking bass line. So when I saw this thing, that was the first time that I had any interest in a musical instrument of any kind. I've been forced to play piano and it didn't really work very well for me. The first Gretsch was I think around 1981. And I'd had a variety of different guitars that I always would trade up. You own one guitar, you trade it up for something else, yada, yada. But it was because I joined a band who were called Theatre of Hate, and their lead singer played a single anniversary, Gretch. It was a green thing and the pickups here, which was a bit odd, but he got a good sound out of it. And when I joined the band, he needed a lead guitar player. And he said to me in the audition, like, if you got in the band, like, what would you do? And I just said, well, I kind of always wanted to get a Gretch and White Falcon, to be honest. That's the next thing I'm sort of obsessing on. And I got in the band and I took all my life savings and waddled down to a shop in London in Charing Cross Road. I think it was called Orange. I remember it cost me the unearthly sum of £800, which was, I don't know, $1,200 at the time, but that was 1981. So all I can tell you is everything I owned, I put into that guitar. I rolled and put everything on Gretch, and so it worked out okay. One of my high school bands, we were kind of into Neil Young. We quite liked, he was often photographed in the studio with a White Falcon. And I always loved that. I can see the photograph now with the long hair, the red and black plaid shirt, and a what looks like a 60s Falcon on his lap, single cutaway. So there was that, and then of course there was Malcolm Young. I saw AC/DC in 1977 with Bon Scott in Manchester in England, and I think he certainly played a Gretsch. I don't know whether he was playing a Falcon, but there was that. And then finally, more recently, there was a band called Bow Wow Wow, and their guitar player, Matthew Ashman, had pretty much this model. And I remember seeing them, their first ever gig in London, and looking up at the guitar going, I have to have one of those. I've only really had Falcons. We did a black Falcon that I really like a lot. Gretches at that point in England weren't a cheap guitar. So it's not like I could get dozens of them. You know, I was like a working musician. I had one, and then I had a backup, and that was kind of about it for the first 3 or 4 years of my career in the Cult. But honestly, I've mostly been fairly monogamous to White Falcons / Black Falcons. I mean, all Gretches, I think that the main attribute of all Gretsch guitars is they create a certain three-dimensional kind of like, all I can say is, to me, the analogy I use, which is terrible, but it's like, if you ever go into a cathedral, there's a certain quality, and I think if all the Gretches I've ever known have an element of that quality, and then it's a question of moving, subtracting, or adding from that to create, you know, to me, it allowed me to create space with the instrument. You know, certain other guitars are quite dense, and there's air and breath within a Gretsch. This particular guitar, this 8424, is just sort of like a celebration of 40 years of the Cult's history. And we thought we'd do a guitar that was based upon how my original 75 Falcon would look with the gold hardware. It still has the replaced pickup, because the one thing I did earlier, I did say that the Baldwin era guitars for me were great. They were great, except the pickups weren't great. So I had to have the pickup, or certainly this pickup needed a lot more horsepower. Other than that, for me, the guitar's pretty standard. I mean, I pin the bridge because I'm pretty heavy-handed and I palm mute a lot. And obviously with a floating bridge, the strings will be down on, that's not going to work. So we pin that. It's got a higher output there. And to be honest, the rest of it's stock. It's just very simply, 40 years of the Cult from 1984 to 2024. And instead of just we felt we wanted to try for something a little more elegant than 40th year anniversary tour, which, we thought 8424 might be have a bit more pizzazz to it, maybe. So that was it. And we thought that worked. I carried it across to the guitar. The guitar obviously has got the nice vintage finish, because most people who own a white Falcon will realise they do change colour. From when you get them, they are literally like, you get snowblind, they're so white. But over time, they age and mellow out and kind of go to more like a vintage white, which is why I did this one. And obviously, over time and sweat, a lot of the gold will come off it, but this is how they look. And keep the original gold binding and stuff. I kind of like the tremolo arm the best. I think that's what's most unique. The rest of the guitar works for me, for my physiology, the size of my hands, the size of me as a human being. The guitar works for me, it sits nicely. All Gretches have the master volume here, which is always pretty groovy. I like that. And the tremolo, it has a very unique action. And that's important to me, they're not all the same. So with this particular arm, I like. So I'd say that's the most unique thing. But the guitar's really kind of a package. They're a thing. They're an entity that's probably a little bigger than the sum of its parts. The White Falcon is sort of a thing in its own, and I've always sort of loved it for that. It's just an entity in all of itself. That's a trip. The fact that I sort of got my own signature guitar, and not only that, it's actually a Falcon, which is somewhat of a, legendary guitar in its own. That's sort of rarefied airspace. When you think of the amount of guys who've really played Falcons, there's not a massive list. So I'm pretty honoured, If I've turned a lot of people on to make them try something a little more exotic, maybe, or contributed to that kind of legend, I think that's important in, rock and roll. I think to have, a few legendary things. I think the stories and the legends are great. We don't need to know everything. Sometimes you just have to feel it. And, I got a feeling when I saw a Falcon, I was like, I must have one. And I think that the Gretsch allowed me to create what I think all is the most important thing from any guitar player is to find your own sound and your style. And I think that's what playing a guitar with this certain set of attributes did for me. My take on it was I started playing it very originally and got kind of like that clear Ennio Morricone sound, something that was kind of spaghetti westernish. That was like my first take on it. And then I started thinking, well, what if we took that and made it like if it took acid and rode a Harley Davidson and thought it was an Easy Rider? What would that sound like? So I started adding pedals and playing around with different amplification. The guitar basically stayed the same. The band got fortunate around the mid-'80s when we put an album out called Love that had a few tunes on it that showcased what at the time to me was a heavy guitar sound, or, you know, but it's heavy, but it had another ethereal quality. Find yourself, you know what I mean? That's the only advice I say to kids. Try and create, have some confidence and faith in your own ability to create. Learn, by all means, you know, but absorb as much as you can. For me, it was experiential, and because of punk, which I mentioned earlier, you know, the criteria wasn't, it was more like your attitude and your energy. Playing was a little bit secondary, rather, you know, it was your belief and your passion. And I think that's important. You know, you can't learn how to be a rock star at rock school. You know, find yourself, find your instrument. Hopefully it'll be a Gretsch. How's that? That's kind of it in a nutshell. That's a living right there.